You are listening to Furious HOA Karens. This is the pettiest property line war ever. Karen yelled that the board could force a tear down, and she said it like she was excited. "You are not allowed to do that without a pass," she shouted, waving her phone at my contractor like it was a badge. The fence panels were halfway up, posts sunk and level. And she was standing in my yard with that smirk she saves for moments when she thinks she has won. I felt the pen dig into my palm as I stepped between her and the crew foreman, who had already set his drill down and was looking at me like he wanted to walk. Rebecca Brown, Welcome Committee Chair of the Briarwood Fence Compliance Association, had decided my fence was her personal crusade, and she was not backing off. I live in Worcester, Massachusetts, in a master-planned community where fences are treated like sacred law. Every post, every board, every inch of setback gets measured twice and argued 3 times. I work as an apartment maintenance supervisor, so I have seen every kind of complaint, every petty rule twisted into a weapon. But this was different. I was trying to refinance my house, and any lien threat could wreck the deal. Rebecca knew that. She had made it clear the day I submitted my fence application that she would be watching. She took a step closer, tilting her phone screen toward me. "I have all day, and so does my fine meter," she said, voice dripping with satisfaction. The screen showed a photo of my property line taken from an angle I recognized immediately. She had been in my backyard. No permission, no notice, just trespassing with a camera to get her evidence shot. I felt my jaw tighten. "When did you take that?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. She shrugged. "Does it matter?" "The point is, you are over the setback line. I can see it right here." The contractor foreman, a guy named Eddie, who had installed fences all over Worcester County, cleared his throat. "We used the survey stakes your HOA approved," he said, nodding toward the orange markers still visible along the line. Rebecca did not even look at him. "The survey is irrelevant if the installation does not match the approved plans," she said. And I reviewed the plans. "This fence is 6 inches too close to the easement." Eddie glanced at me, then back at her. "We are following the plans exactly," he said. Rebecca shook her head slowly like she was talking to a child. "Then the plans are wrong, and you need to stop work immediately." I pulled out my phone and opened the portal where I had submitted the application 3 months earlier. I scrolled to the approval email, the one that included the final survey and the board stamp. "This is the approval," I said, holding the screen toward her. "Signed off by the Architectural Review Committee." Rebecca did not even glance at it. "That approval assumed you would follow the setback rules," she said. "You missed deadlines they never communicated, then blamed the portal." I stared at her. "What deadlines?" "I submitted everything on time." She smiled. "The secondary review period. You were supposed to confirm measurements within 10 business days of the first approval. You did not. So the approval is conditional." Eddie muttered something under his breath and started packing up his tools. I turned to him. "Do not leave yet," I said. He shook his head. "Man, I am not getting in the middle of this. If she is threatening to call the city or tow my truck, I am out." Rebecca perked up at that. "Oh, I would not dream of towing your truck," she said sweetly. "Unless it is still here in an hour, then I will have no choice. I have all day, and so does my fine meter." I watched Eddie load his gear into the truck, my chest tight with frustration. Rebecca set up her small, collapsible step stool next to one of the installed posts and climbed up, tape measure in hand. She extended it along the height of the post, narrating as she went. 5 feet 11 inches, she announced. "Your application said 6 feet. This is a violation." I leaned against the truck bed, trying to keep my voice steady. "The posts are not topped yet," I said. "The caps go on after the boards are secured." She hopped down, folding the stool with a snap. "Then, you should have waited to install until you had all the materials on site. This is an incomplete structure, which means it is an unapproved modification." Eddie started the engine. I walked over to his window. "Give me 2 days," I said. I will sort this out and call you back." He shook his head. "I am not coming back, man." She tried to intimidate me on camera. I do not need that kind of heat. He drove off, leaving me standing in my half-finished yard with Rebecca still holding her tape measure like a trophy. She folded it slowly, tucking it into her cardigan pocket. "I will be filing a formal complaint with the board tonight," she said. "You can expect a notice by tomorrow morning. And if you try to continue work without board reapproval, I will personally request an immediate stop work order from the city." I went inside and pulled every document I had. The original application, the survey, the approval email, the contractor contract, photos of the string line we had used to mark the setback. I also checked my security camera footage, the one I had installed on the back corner of the house after a package theft 6 months earlier. The timestamp showed Rebecca in my backyard at 10:42 at night, 2 days before she filed her first complaint. She had used a flashlight to inspect the fence line, sweeping the beam across the boards, and then taken photos with her phone. No permission, no advance notice, just trespassing in the dark. I saved the clip and backed it up to 3 separate drives. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. The envelope had the Briarwood Fence Compliance Association logo, and inside was a single-page notice on official letterhead. It listed 4 separate violations: setback encroachment, unapproved height variance, incomplete installation, and failure to confirm secondary review measurements. Each violation carried a $50 daily fine, retroactive to the day I started construction. The total already sat at $600. At the bottom, in bold text, it said that failure to pay within 14 days would result in referral to collections and a lien filing. I read it twice, then called my neighbor, a guy named Mike who had caught Rebecca on his doorbell video at night near my property line a week earlier. Mike came over that afternoon and pulled up the footage on his phone. It showed Rebecca walking along the side of his house, then stopping at the property line to aim her phone camera toward my fence. The timestamp was 10:18 at night, same evening as my clip. "She is scouting," Mike said. "Looking for angles." He sent me the file, and I added it to my evidence folder. I also took photos of the survey stakes, still in the ground exactly where the surveyor had placed them, and measured the distance from the fence line to the easement marker. 6 inches of clearance, exactly as specified in the approved plans. I drafted a response letter and attached every piece of evidence: photos, timestamps, the approved survey, the camera footage showing Rebecca trespassing. I submitted it through the HOA portal and sent a copy by certified mail to the management company that handled Briarwood business. Then I waited. 3 days later, I got a call from the property manager, a woman named Linda, who sounded tired before she even finished her greeting. "I have reviewed your submission," she said. "The board is scheduling a hearing for next month. In the meantime, the fines remain active." I asked if the stop work order was enforceable. She hesitated. "Technically, no, the city has not issued any order. But the board can assess additional fines if you proceed without reapproval." I hung up and called a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. He listened to the whole story, asked for copies of the documents, and then gave me the news I did not want to hear. "The hearing is your best shot," he said. "If you can prove the violations are fabricated and the process was abused, the board might reverse the fines. But if they do not, you are looking at litigation, and that is expensive." He quoted me a retainer that made my stomach drop. I thanked him and said I would think about it. Then I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the half-finished fence through the window, trying to figure out how to finish this without losing my refinance or my sanity. Rebecca was not done. 2 days later, I came home from work to find a new notice taped to my front door. This one was not from the board. It was from a private towing company, warning that my contractor truck, if parked on the street during restricted hours, would be subject to immediate removal. I did not have a contractor truck. Eddie had left and was not coming back. But the notice was dated and signed, and it referenced a complaint filed by a homeowner about ongoing construction disruptions. I knew exactly who had filed it. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA chaos and satisfying payback. That same afternoon, Mike texted me a screenshot. It was from the neighborhood group chat, a private thread that included about a dozen homeowners on our street. The screenshot showed a message from Rebecca, posted the night before. She had written that my fence project was unapproved, that I was ignoring board warnings, and that anyone who saw continued construction should report it immediately to the management company. She also suggested that neighbors avoid doing business with any contractor who worked for me, because they were clearly willing to violate HOA rules. Mike had highlighted the timestamp, 11:37 at night. "She is coordinating retaliation," he said in his text. "This is not just enforcement anymore." I saved the screenshot and added it to my evidence folder. Then I did something I had been holding off on. I filed a formal complaint against Rebecca with the management company, citing harassment, trespassing, and abuse of her position as welcome committee chair. I attached the camera footage, the group chat screenshot, and a timeline showing how she had escalated from a simple fence inquiry to threats of towing, liens, and contractor blacklisting. I waited for the right audience, because the reveal needed witnesses. The complaint went into the system, and Linda confirmed receipt, but she warned me that the board would likely review it at the same hearing where they were reviewing my fence violations. The next week, Rebecca showed up at my house unannounced. I was in the garage, organizing tools, when I heard her voice from the driveway. "We need to talk," she called out. I stepped into the doorway and saw her standing beside her car, step stool tucked under one arm and phone in hand. "I am not discussing this outside of the hearing," I said. She smiled that tight, cold smile. "I am just trying to help you avoid further penalties," she said. "If you agree to remove the fence and reapply with corrected measurements, I can recommend that the board waive the fines." I shook my head. "The measurements are correct. The fence is exactly where the approved survey says it should be." She tilted her head. "Then I guess we will let the board decide. I have all day, and so does my fine meter." I watched her drive away, then went back inside and pulled up the HOA bylaws. I read through the section on board conduct and member complaints, looking for any procedural angle I could use. What I found was a clause that required board members to recuse themselves from any vote where they had a direct personal involvement in the dispute. Rebecca had filed the original complaint, gathered the evidence, posted in the group chat, and now she was offering to negotiate directly with me. If she voted on my hearing, it was a clear conflict of interest. I documented the clause, added it to my evidence packet, and sent an email to Linda flagging the issue. She replied within an hour. Noted, "I will forward this to the board president." 2 weeks before the hearing, I got another surprise. A bag of concrete mix appeared on my front porch, label turned away so I could not see the brand or type. There was no note, no delivery receipt, no indication of who had left it. I checked my security camera and saw a figure in a dark jacket and hood drop it off at 6 in the morning, then walk quickly back to a car parked 2 houses down. The video was too grainy to make out a plate, but the car looked like Rebecca's sedan. I took photos of the bag from every angle, then moved it to the garage. Mike saw me doing it and came over. "What is that about?" he asked. I shook my head. "I think she is trying to make it look like I am doing unpermitted work." He frowned. "That is messed up, man." The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday evening at the community clubhouse, but 3 days before, I got a call from Linda. "The board has moved the hearing to Thursday morning," she said. 10 a.m. at the municipal building. I asked why the change. She hesitated. The board president felt it would be better to hold it in a more formal setting. I thanked her and hung up, realizing immediately what had happened. They were trying to rush it through quietly, on a workday when most homeowners could not attend. I sent a text to Mike and 2 other neighbors who had offered to come as witnesses. The hearing moved to Thursday at 10. Can you still make it? Mike replied within minutes. I will be there. Thursday morning, I arrived at the municipal building 30 minutes early. The hearing room was a small conference space with a long table, a few chairs, and a projector screen on one wall. Linda was already there, setting up a laptop. The board president, a man named George, arrived next, followed by 2 other board members. Rebecca came in last, step stool in hand and phone clipped to her belt. She did not look at me. George called the meeting to order and asked me to present my case. I stood and handed out copies of my evidence packet, the approved survey, the photos of the survey stakes, the camera footage showing Rebecca trespassing, the group chat screenshot, and the timeline of her escalating threats. George flipped through the packet slowly. Rebecca leaned forward. Those photos are irrelevant, she said. The issue is whether the fence meets code, not whether I was on his property. I waited for George to respond. He looked at Linda. Is there a provision in the bylaws about board member conduct during enforcement actions? Linda nodded and pulled up the bylaws on her laptop. She read the conflict of interest clause aloud. George set the packet down and looked at Rebecca. You filed the original complaint and gathered the evidence yourself? Rebecca did not hesitate. Yes, as part of my role on the welcome committee. George frowned. That creates a procedural problem. You should have recused yourself from the enforcement decision. Rebecca sat back, her face tight. I was performing my duties, she said. If homeowners could avoid enforcement just by claiming bias, no one would ever face consequences. George shook his head. That is not what the bylaws say. He turned to the other board members. I am recommending we table this hearing until we can get an independent review of the measurements and the enforcement timeline. One of the board members, a woman in a blazer, nodded. I agree. This has gotten too personal. Rebecca stood abruptly. You are letting him off because he filed a complaint against me. George held up a hand. We are following procedure. Sit down, Rebecca. She sat, but her jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitching. George looked at me. We will arrange for a neutral surveyor to verify the fence measurements. If the surveyor confirms your installation matches the approved plans, the fines will be waived and we will address the complaint you filed separately. If the surveyor finds discrepancies, we will reconvene and determine next steps. I nodded. That works for me. Rebecca did not say anything. The meeting ended 10 minutes later, and I walked out into the courthouse hallway with Mike and the other neighbors who had come to support me. Mike clapped me on the shoulder. You did good in there, he said. I shrugged. It is not over yet. Rebecca walked past us toward the exit, phone pressed to her ear, and I heard her say something about appealing the decision. Mike watched her go. She is not going to let this drop, he said. I know, I replied. But now she has to do it under scrutiny. We left the building and I drove home, feeling the tension in my shoulders start to ease for the first time in weeks. The neutral surveyor arrived the following Monday, a guy named Paul, who worked for an independent firm that did commercial and residential property work all over Worcester County. He spent 2 hours measuring the fence line, checking the survey stakes, and comparing everything to the approved plans. I stood in the yard with him, answering questions when he asked, but mostly just watching him work. Rebecca showed up halfway through, step stool in hand, and tried to point out what she claimed were discrepancies. Paul looked at her. Ma'am, I need to complete this assessment without interference. If you have concerns, you can submit them in writing to the management company. Rebecca opened her mouth, then closed it and walked back to her car. She sat in the driver's seat, watching through the windshield, phone in hand. Paul finished his measurements and packed up his gear. I will have the report to the management company by end of week, he said. From what I am seeing, your fence is within tolerance and matches the approved survey. The setback is clear, the height is consistent with the plans, and the installation is complete except for the post caps. I felt a wave of relief so strong I had to sit down on the back steps after he left. Mike came over that evening and I told him what Paul had said. "That is huge," Mike said. "If the report clears you, the fines go away and Rebecca loses all leverage." The report arrived on Friday. Linda emailed me a copy, and I read it twice to make sure I was not misunderstanding. Paul had found no violations. The fence was correctly positioned, the height matched the approved plans, and the installation met all local building codes. The report recommended that the board waive the fines and close the complaint. Linda also attached a separate note from George, informing me that the board would vote on the surveyor's recommendations at the next meeting, and that Rebecca had been asked to recuse herself from the vote due to the conflict of interest findings. I printed the report and put it in a binder with all my other evidence. Then I went outside and finished installing the post caps, the final piece Eddie had not completed before Rebecca scared him off. The fence looked good. Clean lines, solid construction, exactly where it was supposed to be. I stood back and took a photo, then sent it to Mike. "Finished," I texted. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a short message. "Rebecca is going to hate that." He was right. 2 days later, I got a voicemail from Rebecca. Her voice was tight and clipped. "I want you to know I am appealing the surveyor's report," she said. "There are measurement errors that were not addressed, and I have documentation that proves it. I will be presenting my findings at the next board meeting, and I expect the fines to be reinstated. I have all day, and so does my fine meter." I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Linda with a note asking if Rebecca was still permitted to participate in the appeal given the recusal order. Linda replied that she would check with George. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday, and this time it was held at the clubhouse in the evening so homeowners could attend. I arrived early and found a seat near the front. Mike and 2 other neighbors sat with me. The room filled up quickly, and I realized that word had spread. Rebecca arrived exactly on time, carrying a folder and her step stool. She sat in the back row, phone on her lap, staring straight ahead. George called the meeting to order and started with routine business, budget approvals, landscaping bids, pool maintenance. Then he moved to new business and read the surveyor's report aloud, summarizing the findings and the recommendation to waive my fines. Rebecca stood. "I would like to present my findings," she said. George looked at Linda, who whispered something to him. George cleared his throat. "Rebecca, you were asked to recuse yourself from this matter due to conflict of interest. You cannot participate in the discussion or the vote." Rebecca did not sit. "I am not voting," she said. "I am presenting evidence as a homeowner." George shook his head. "That is not how this works. You are a board member, and you filed the original complaint. You are recused. Sit down." Rebecca sat, but her hands were shaking with anger. George opened the floor for questions from other homeowners. One man in the middle row raised his hand and asked if the surveyor had checked the easement clearances. George confirmed that he had, and that everything was in compliance. Another woman asked if there were any outstanding fines. George said that pending the board vote, all fines would be waived. Then Mike stood and asked if the board was going to address the harassment complaint I had filed. George nodded. That is the next item on the agenda. Linda pulled up the complaint on the projector screen, and George summarized it: trespassing, retaliation, group chat coordination, and abuse of authority. He also noted that 2 other homeowners had submitted corroborating witness statements. Rebecca stood again. "This is a witch hunt," she said. "I was doing my job." George cut her off. "You were not doing your job when you entered his backyard without permission at 10:42 at night. You were not doing your job when you posted in the group chat that neighbors should avoid his contractors. And you were not doing your job when you threatened to tow a truck that did not belong to him. You crossed the line, Rebecca. Multiple times." The room was silent. Rebecca looked around, face flushed, and then grabbed her folder and step stool and walked out. The door slammed behind her. George waited a moment, then called for a vote on the surveyor's report. The board voted unanimously to accept the findings and waive the fines. Then, George called for a vote on my harassment complaint. The board voted to issue a formal reprimand to Rebecca and to remove her from the Welcome Committee chair position, effective immediately. They also voted to establish a policy requiring board members to use neutral third parties for enforcement inspections going forward, and to ban any board member from interpreting measurements without professional verification. I walked out of the meeting with Mike and the other neighbors, feeling like I could finally breathe. Mike shook my hand. "That was justice," he said. I nodded. It was a long time coming. We stood in the parking lot for a few minutes, talking about what came next. One of the neighbors mentioned that Rebecca had been talking about running for board president in the next election. Mike laughed. "After tonight? No way she wins." I hoped he was right, but I was not taking any chances. I had already started documenting everything, just in case she tried to come at me again. A week later, I got a letter from the management company confirming that all fines had been waived, that the harassment complaint had been resolved, and that the new policy on enforcement inspections was now in effect. The letter also mentioned that the HOA would be paying for the neutral surveyor going forward as a preventive measure to avoid future disputes. I filed the letter with the rest of my documentation and put the binder on a shelf in my office. The fence was finished, the fines were gone, and Rebecca was off the Welcome Committee. It felt like a win, but I knew it was not really over. Not yet. Rebecca was quiet for the next few weeks, and I started to relax. Then I got a call from Eddie, the contractor who had walked off the job. "Man, I owe you an apology," he said. "I heard what happened at the board meeting. I should have stuck it out." I told him not to worry about it. "You made the right call," I said. "She was escalating and you did not need that liability." He thanked me and said if I ever needed work done again, he would be there. I appreciated the gesture, but I was hoping I would not need a contractor for a long time. Then the twist hit. Mike texted me late one night with a screenshot from a different group chat, one that included contractors and vendors who worked in the Briarwood neighborhood. The screenshot showed a message from a hardware store manager asking if anyone had ordered extra gate hardware for a property on my street around the time my fence was being installed. The manager noted that the order had been placed under my name, but the billing address did not match my account, and the hardware had been shipped to a P.O. box. Mike added a note, "This you?" I replied immediately. "No, I never ordered gate hardware." Mike sent another message. "Check the date on the order. It matches the day before your contractor walked." I called the hardware store the next morning and spoke to the manager. She pulled up the order and confirmed that someone had used my name and a credit card that was not mine to purchase gate hinges, latches, and alignment brackets. The order had been flagged as suspicious because the billing address was a P.O. box in a neighboring town, but it had already shipped before the fraud alert went through. She gave me the P.O. box number and I wrote it down. Then I called the post office and asked if I could find out who rented that box. The clerk said I would need a police report and a subpoena. I filed a police report that afternoon explaining the fraudulent order and providing the screenshots Mike had sent. The officer took notes and said he would follow up with the hardware store. Then I went home and pulled up the county property records, cross-referencing the P.O. Box town with any addresses tied to Rebecca. What I found made my stomach drop. Rebecca's husband owned a small storage unit facility 2 blocks from the post office in that town. The facility address was listed as the business contact for several vendor accounts, including one with the same hardware store. I saved the property records and added them to my evidence folder. Mike came over that evening and I showed him what I had found. "She ordered the hardware to sabotage your gate alignment," he said. "If the crew had installed it wrong, she could have used it as proof that your contractor was incompetent and that the whole fence was a violation." I nodded. "And the receipt trail points to her." Mike whistled. "That is fraud, man. You need to take this to the cops and the board." I agreed, and the next morning I called the officer who had taken my report. He asked me to send him the property records and the screenshots, and he said he would loop in a detective who handled HOA-related fraud cases. 2 days later, the detective called. "We are opening an investigation," he said. "If the hardware order ties back to Rebecca, she could be looking at charges." I asked how long it would take. He said a few weeks, maybe longer. In the meantime, I was advised not to contact Rebecca directly. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. The investigation was out of my hands now, but I knew it was the right move. Rebecca had crossed a line, and this time it was not just an HOA dispute. It was criminal. The HOA board found out about the investigation a week later when the detective contacted Linda to request records of all vendor transactions tied to Rebecca's role on the welcome committee. Linda called me and asked if I knew what was going on. I gave her a brief summary, and she was silent for a moment. "This is bad," she said. "If Rebecca used her position to commit fraud, the HOA could be liable." I told her I did not think the HOA was liable, because Rebecca had acted outside her authority, but I was not a lawyer. She said she would talk to George and get back to me. Rebecca found out about the investigation 3 days later, and she did not take it well. Mike texted me a screenshot from the original neighborhood group chat, showing a long rant Rebecca had posted at 2 in the morning. She claimed I had fabricated the fraud allegations, that I was trying to destroy her reputation, and that the board was complicit in a conspiracy to silence her. The post was incoherent and full of caps lock accusations. George removed the post within an hour and sent a message to the group chat reminding everyone that personal attacks and unfounded accusations violated community standards. Rebecca replied with a single line, "I will bury you in notices until you run out of printer ink." Mike sent me a screenshot of that too. The next board meeting was tense. George opened with an announcement that the HOA had retained legal counsel to review the fraud investigation and to ensure the association was protected. He also announced that Rebecca had submitted her resignation from the board, effective immediately. The room was silent. George did not elaborate, and no one asked questions. After the meeting, Mike and I stood in the parking lot, and he shook his head. "She is done," he said. I nodded, but I did not feel celebratory. I just felt tired. The detective called me again 2 weeks later with an update. "We have confirmed that the hardware order was placed using your name and a credit card linked to an account tied to Rebecca's husband's business," he said. We also found email correspondence between Rebecca and the hardware store discussing the order. She claimed she was helping you coordinate materials, but the store manager says she never identified herself as acting on your behalf. It is enough for charges. I asked what would happen next. He said the case would go to the district attorney, and Rebecca would likely be offered a plea deal if she agreed to restitution and community service. I thanked him and hung up, then sat on my back deck and looked at the fence. It was solid and level, exactly where it was supposed to be. The whole ordeal had taken months, cost me time and stress I could not get back, and nearly derailed my refinance. But it was over. Rebecca was off the board, under investigation, and facing consequences. The HOA had new policies to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. And I had a folder full of evidence that proved every word of the story I had just lived through. Mike came over a few days later, and we sat on the deck, drinking coffee and talking about everything that had happened. He asked if I had heard anything more from Rebecca. I shook my head. Not a word. He grinned. Good. Let her stay quiet. I agreed. Then he asked if I was going to run for the board in the next election. I laughed. No way. I have had enough HOA drama to last a lifetime. He nodded. Fair enough, but if you change your mind, I will vote for you. I thanked him, and we sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the fence line. The plea deal came through a month later. Rebecca agreed to pay full restitution for the fraudulent hardware order, perform 100 hours of community service, and stay off the HOA board for 5 years. The charges would be reduced to a misdemeanor and eventually expunged if she completed the terms. The detective called to let me know, and I thanked him for his work. He said I had done a good job documenting everything, and that the case would have been much harder without the evidence I had provided. I appreciated the acknowledgement, but mostly I was just glad it was finished. The HOA sent out a newsletter the following week, announcing the new enforcement policies and the neutral surveyor requirement. The newsletter also mentioned that the Welcome Committee would be restructured with new leadership and clearer guidelines for member conduct. George called me personally to thank me for my patience and to confirm that the refinance lien issue had been fully resolved. I told him I appreciated the changes the board had made and that I hoped they would prevent future disputes. He agreed, and we ended the call on good terms. Rebecca moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later. I heard about it from Mike, who saw the moving truck in her driveway one Saturday morning. "She is gone," he texted. I did not reply immediately. When I finally did, I just sent a thumbs-up emoji. I did not feel vindictive or triumphant. I just felt relief. The fence was still standing, the refinance had gone through, and the neighborhood was quieter. That was enough. I kept the evidence binder on the shelf in my office, just in case. Mike joked that I should write a book about the whole thing, but I told him I was happy to leave it in the past. The new Welcome Committee chair was a retired teacher named Susan, who had a reputation for being fair and practical. She stopped by one afternoon to introduce herself and to confirm that my fence was officially in compliance with all current rules. I thanked her and offered her a coffee, which she accepted. We talked for a while about the neighborhood and the changes the board had made. She mentioned that several other homeowners had thanked her for the new policies and that enforcement complaints were way down. I told her that was good to hear. The tow vendor incident became a footnote in the whole saga, but it was one of the funniest moments. Rebecca had insisted the tow was authorized, and the tow driver hesitated, asking to see the work order in writing. She did not have one, because the tow had never been approved by the board or the management company. The driver refused to act without proper authorization and drove off, leaving Rebecca standing in the street yelling into her phone. Mike caught the whole thing on his doorbell camera and sent me the clip. I watched it 3 times, and each time I could not help but smile. It was the perfect example of Rebecca getting hoisted by her own rules. The new policies also led to an unexpected consequence. The HOA decided to cancel the vendor relationship tied to the abuse, reviewing all contractor and towing agreements and finding several instances where Rebecca had pressured vendors to act without proper board approval. The towing company that had issued the fake notice on my door lost their contract, and the board issued a public apology to homeowners for the confusion. It was a small victory, but it mattered. It showed that the board was serious about accountability and that Rebecca's tactics had backfired. As the months went on, life in Briarwood settled into a new rhythm. The fence became just another part of the landscape, no longer a symbol of conflict, but just a boundary that did what it was supposed to do. I finished the refinance, got a better rate, and used some of the savings to upgrade my security cameras. Mike and I stayed friends, and we often sat on the deck, talking about work and life and everything except HOA drama. Susan ran the Welcome Committee with quiet efficiency, and enforcement issues were handled by neutral inspectors who did not have personal stakes in the outcome. It was not perfect, but it was better. One afternoon I was working in the yard when a delivery driver pulled up to the curb. He was stuck waiting for another truck to move, and he leaned out the window to ask if I knew how long it would take. I shrugged and said I had no idea. He glanced at the fence and said, "Nice work." "Who did it?" I told him I had hired a contractor but had to finish it myself after some complications. He nodded. "HOA trouble?" I laughed. "How did you guess?" He grinned. "I deliver all over Worcester County. Every neighborhood has a story." I wished him luck, and he drove off once the truck moved. It was a small moment, but it reminded me that I was not alone in dealing with this kind of thing. Every neighborhood had its own version of Rebecca. Karen's timeline was proven false with timestamps, and that was the evidence that finally broke her credibility. The camera footage, the group chat screenshots, the property records, and the hardware store receipts all lined up to show a pattern of deliberate sabotage and retaliation. It was not just about a fence or a setback measurement. It was about someone who had used their position to harass and intimidate, and who had finally been held accountable. The board vote to waive the fines and remove Rebecca from the Welcome Committee was unanimous, and the new policies ensured that future enforcement would be fair and transparent. A screenshot of the HOA group chat coordinating retaliation became the key piece of evidence, and I handed the officer on scene the proof and asked for an incident number immediately. It was the trump card I had been holding, and when I deployed it in the courthouse hallway right before the hearing, it flipped everything. The HOA also agreed to pay for a neutral surveyor going forward, covering the cost as part of their commitment to preventing disputes before they escalated. George personally apologized to me at a later meeting, acknowledging that the board had not moved quickly enough to stop Rebecca's behavior and that they should have enforced the conflict of interest policy earlier. I accepted the apology and moved on. There was no point in holding a grudge. The system had worked, eventually, and that was what mattered. Looking back, the whole experience taught me a lot about documentation, persistence, and the importance of having allies. Mike's doorbell footage, the neighbor witness statements, the attorney's advice, and the detective's investigation all played a role in the outcome. I could not have won this fight alone, and I did not try to. I built a case, step by step, and I waited for the right moment to deploy the evidence. When that moment came, in the courthouse hallway with witnesses present, it was decisive. Rebecca had no defense against her own words and actions, and the board had no choice but to act. The fence still stands, solid and level, a reminder of what it took to get it there. Every time I look at it, I think about the string line showdown where Rebecca yanked the line, claiming it was proof that I was over the setback, and the crew refusing to touch anything until the board provided written authorization. I think about the night she trespassed with a flashlight, the fraudulent hardware order, the tow truck that never came, and the moment in the courthouse hallway when I handed over the evidence and watched her face go pale. I think about all the small victories that added up to one big win, and I am grateful it is over. Thank you for being here.